Hi, thank you everyone for joining this webinar. So let's get started. As Bill mentioned, my name is Musa Shirazi. I work for InstaCluster as a senior consultant. So my responsibilities are helping clients with deployments, architecture designs for their infrastructure, for projects like Kafka, Elasticsearch, and Cassandra as well. Recently, as well, I've been involved in this as well. Um, uh, Here is my email address as well, just in case if you need to contact me after the webinar for any questions, if you have any more detail about you want to know about these technologies, feel free to send me an email. Also add me on LinkedIn as well. I usually post some blogs as well. So recently working on the Elasticsearch, I posted it. So yeah, that's me, and let's me introduce a little bit about InstaCluster as well. At InstaCluster, we provide a managed platform for services like Elasticsearch, Kafka, and Cassandra. And we provide enterprise level of support. We've got teams all over the globe, operations team who manage your Kafka cluster or Elasticsearch or Cassandra cluster and make it a lot easier to manage from a management perspective as well. So let's start and just get some become more interactive. I usually ask that questions when I'm live, but on this virtual webinar, I'll ask you to, if you could please just put some comments about what you know about Elasticsearch before we talk about a little bit more about Open Distro for Elasticsearch, which is basically a talk about. So yeah, if you can just type that way, I can see. Anyone just wanna chip in? Only the basic and fail installation on Windows. That's good to know. Why should you use Lustre instead of Lucene? That's something you'll get an answer about that. That's good. That's basically. Um, yeah, it works on logs. That's really good answer as well. Um, yes, a log stash. I will explain about a little bit what is log stash as well. And there is also a comment about why should you use Elasticsearch instead of Lucene as well. It might answer that question as well. Have used Elasticsearch but trying to figure it out multi-tenancy and security. Okay. Then it's a very yeah, you're going to learn this today, and I'm going to do a quick demo as well. Hopefully if we'll have a time on the security, definitely, so you'll get some hands-on. You'll understand the concept about the security. So yeah, good answers. Thank you very much for the answers. Let's get started then. So let's see what is Elasticsearch first. So Elasticsearch is an open source distributed search and analytics engine built on Apache Lucene. Okay. Elasticsearch is also called a distributed document store. Sometimes Elasticsearch is also referred to as having your own Google, in-house Google, right? And you can search big data very fast. It's, you can run terabytes of data, put that into Elasticsearch and run the queries very quickly as compared to if you would do it on the traditional database. Okay, as you can see in this diagram, Elasticsearch is not limited to one type of use case. As you can see, we could have Logstash getting logs data, for example, or we could be sending some sort of a messages, which could be, the chats information or a tweets and other stuff. We could put that into Elasticsearch and do searching against that. Or we could be sending a metrics data. For example, you've got some programming languages who's producing some sort of a metrics, or some servers or applications or thing, we can push that metrics push into Elasticsearch cluster and then can be used for monitoring, as you can see on the right side, right? And then obviously a document and the search engine itself. So yeah, so many use cases for one product itself, and you use that for security application, application level monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, and you can visualize those logs or data or whatever data within the Elasticsearch cluster very in as well. So now, what is behind the scenes? So there was a comment about Lucene. Why wouldn't you use Lucene? I will put a little bit, elaborate a little bit more as well on this. So behind the scene, Elasticsearch runs on Lucene, right? So what is Lucene? Lucene is an open source project, is written in Java and used for full text searching. So one of the drawback and why we don't use Lucene is that uh, Lucene was not built on what we call distribution or scale in mind. It's very powerful from a search perspective, but it becomes a lot difficult if you go and deploy Lucene on its own. And that's where the Elasticsearch comes in. What Elasticsearch does is basically it makes it easy to deploy a bunch of nodes or in a cluster environment and start pushing data into it. And that's where why you would use Elasticsearch instead of Lucene, because in the end you're still using the power of Lucene, but lot more easy to scale and then integrate with other services like because Elasticsearch uses something called REST API, and it works on the JSON data. So any application who supports REST API can connect to Elasticsearch cluster and be able to push data into Elasticsearch, and then you can do a lot more powerful features like searching and aggregation and things like that. So that's why this is the reason why you would use Elasticsearch instead of Lucene. So what are the use cases of Elasticsearch, right? I talked about use cases. One of the use cases, common features or a use cases of Elasticsearch is log and log analysis, right? Lots of organizations store logs data into Elasticsearch and do that uh, analysis of that. Also, a lot of organizations use Elasticsearch for server and network monitoring as well. Okay, the traditional databases system aren't always choice for applications that are heavy on text searches as well, and that's where the Elasticsearch really shines, because ability to handle fuzzy searching. There are features like fuzzy searching, autocomplete features. They're all out of box provided by Elasticsearch. Uh, and another use cases is a security analytics use case. This is being used now. It has started to shine quite heavily because lots of companies are using Elasticsearch as a security analytics engine like a SIM. So the traditional SIMs would be very heavy or slow to respond because maybe they're not using that NoSQL or Elasticsearch features. And that's where Elasticsearch can be used, where you can push your all data, because obviously the log data is already there and all the metrics data is there, and then you can correlate those and analyze and be used by the security teams as well. So SOC operations teams who can use that from that perspective. Okay. Uh, Other features is enterprise search, which is what the idea behind the enterprise search is that it allows teams and organizations to search the data scattered across whole of your company, for example. So let's say you've got offices around the globe. There is a data within those offices or on your data centers. So instead of you going and searching individual application, because every organization will have hundreds of different enterprise level applications. So the idea behind enterprise search is that you push all those metadata information into Elasticsearch and then be able to search in one pane of glass instead of individually logging into every application and then searching the information. Geolocation is also very powerful tool for searching and can be useful. Can be used for a lot of features, like you want to see where I can find the nearest pizza, or what is the nearest hotel next to me. So these are all things which we can do through Elasticsearch. Okay, bit of a history about Elasticsearch. So in 2010, Shai Bannon, an engineer called Shai Bannon, who released the first version of Elasticsearch as an open source distribution. Later, he formed a company called Elastic, and if you can see on the bottom, these are all different releases from the Elastic.co Elasticsearch version itself. It's based on pure open source, but obviously with the Elastic.co added some extra features, which were enterprise level features. Obviously, you needed to get a license for that, such as security, alerting, and auditing, and all those features, which are also called XPEX features, are provided by Elastic.co. But obviously you have to pay for the license for those particular features. In 2019, however, Open Distro for Elasticsearch was created project. So this is backed by Amazon Web Services, AWS. They started a project called Open Distro for Elasticsearch, which they call 100% open source distribution of Elasticsearch with advanced features, enterprise features. And we're going to talk about those features in more detail, just so that it is super clear, because we're going to talk about Open Distro for Elasticsearch. The current release is 1.9.0, which is equivalent to a 7.8 of Elasticsearch. So if you're using Elasticsearch, and if you're not heard about Open Distro for Elasticsearch, which is just close to the latest version, but there is a separate version, because obviously this is one hours work on. So I've got questions. I will try to answer those questions as well. What's the relation between commercial and open source version? There will be an answer to this question very soon. What is the difference between the open source? And that's the reason we're talking about Open Distro for Elasticsearch, because it does provide a lot of those enterprise features without any cost. Is there any locking to AWS using Open Distro? No, not at all. This is exactly what is why they say it is a 100% open source product, basically. So just a super high level, and to answer this question, Open Distro for Elasticsearch, it's backed by AWS, but fully open source. So there is no locking from AWS. You can just go and download it. This is what I'm show that, and you can literally start using that. But what is the advantage is that comes with an enterprise grade features, which you may possibly have to pay for them if you were to do it. So for example, the benefits of Open Distro, as I said, it is 100% open source. It provides you a freedom, so you can freely view, use, change, or even distribute that code itself. Okay, Open Distro for Elasticsearch bundle with enterprise features. And now, what are those features? It is security, uh, uh, and uh, uh, and also comes with alerting, and we're going to talk those very much in detail. So this is again some of the advantages or features of Open Distro for Elasticsearch. And then it is purely community driven, and that's what the saying. The Amazon has basically motive that this should not be locked because of specific features added on it. So any feature or any plugins which are added are pure 100% open source. Any performance or feature caveat when used out of AWS. That's something is depends on where you're deploying that. So there is no difference between Open Distro for Elasticsearch or an Elasticsearch, because it's an extra feature which AWS provide on top of the pure open source Elasticsearch. So so that's just an important consideration. So so the features of are security, so you can get a very enterprise level security without you having to get any licenses. It provides alerting. What that means is that you can provide alerting not only on your cluster, how's the health of those cluster, but also based on what data within that cluster. Let's suppose you put some sort of Apache logs, so you'll be able to just go and search and alert on those logs based on certain type of messages. For example, if you're seeing 404 or 200, and you want to see which of my logs have 503 message or a 404 message and things like that, or give me anything where the users all those alerting you can configure on based on that data which is on Elasticsearch itself. It does provide SQL like queries as well. This is an extra plugin which is added as well. So once you do a data on Elasticsearch, a normal query language for Elasticsearch is Query DSL, which is very powerful on its own. But some people who are come from a background of database would prefer SQL. So that's where the SQL is out of box provided. So you can run SQL-like queries on your Elasticsearch data and get the data back. And out of box performance analyzer, and we'll talk about those features as we go along. So security features are the Open Distro for Elasticsearch give you comprehensive set of features to help you keep your data secure and stay compliant with regulations such as GDPR, PCI, and ISO. For example, if you're a company who is using Elasticsearch and you're using pure open source and you don't have any security, I would recommend to use Open Distro for Elasticsearch because you get out of box that. What it does is basically it provides you authentication with different external tools like LDAP, SAML, Kerberos, all those authentication infrastructures, enterprise infrastructure. So it can integrate with that, and that means the users can be given us access based on the authentication itself. So it also provides what we call rollback authentication, which means that you can, once you put data into Elasticsearch, you're able to then have something called indices, and those indices you can give specific control on specific users. So you say, okay, specific team of members are not allowed to see a log data or a specific field in that data, and that's where we can control that from a control way. Multi-tenant is basically is an idea where you can provide different dashboards for different teams as well. Okay, so so now the encryption. Let's talk about encryption. Open Distro for Elasticsearch support OpenSSL and TLS by default. So allowing you to have a secure cluster, not only inter-cluster traffic it encrypts, but also external as well. Also, it is basically, as you can see in the diagram, this is a typical big architecture look like in Elasticsearch. I won't be going too much detail because normally we cover that into workshops basically, but just to elaborate that, you have some inputs coming in, which is also a TLS, and then Elasticsearch provides different nodes types. So you have data nodes, which holds all of your data into Elasticsearch cluster. You have masters nodes who take care of those masters of that cluster, such as what data sits on where and how it's distributed, because Elasticsearch is distributed in nature. And then you have client nodes who can go and search those data when the request comes in, either from Kibana or some other applications who want to search data into Elasticsearch cluster. So the security concepts, again, some of them going in detail a little bit on Open Distro perspective, is that you have a concept of users. User can be anything which client wants to access Open Distro for Elasticsearch cluster. You have roles, which then tells you what permissions are allowed and what are not allowed for specific users. Okay, so roles can be combination of different permissions for different things, and then obviously the permission is whether what you are allowed to do it. Okay, can you explain what is a client node? It is an external Elasticsearch cluster or waiting within the cluster. Okay, let me go back a little bit and then explain about that. So got that sign. So what is a client node? Is client node is also within itself inside the cluster. Every node by default is also a client node. What is client node is like a load balancer. So basically when the request comes in, it just goes with one of those client nodes. The request comes in and then it sends the request to whole cluster because maybe someone is looking for a certain type of a log message. So this client request will then send the request to all those data nodes, and then once the request comes back from all those data nodes, it can send back to the external clients. So to answer your question, client node is internal to itself as a cluster, but in a big enterprise environments, when you have lots of nodes, you normally dedicate each node to its own role. So as I explained, data node, master nodes are separate, and then you create even a client node so then they can use as a load balancer, so to reduce load on your data nodes, because the data nodes are the one who holds most of the data. Hope I answer your question. uh, and then you have role mappings basically. So all those users, we were talking about the security core concepts in Open Distro for Elasticsearch. So you have role mappings, which basically can then combine the roles to the users. And we're going to talk about the security. I'm going to do a quick demo on Elasticsearch, how you do it on the security, on from a security perspective. Okay. So that's how it works. Basically, Open Distro for Elasticsearch, you can integrate your existing authentication infrastructure, such as LDAP, Corpus, as I mentioned earlier, or HTTPN, or a single sign-on, and things like that. So the concept is that the request comes in, it basically goes to the authentication provider, which could be one of those, and then it goes back. If the user is authorized, the response come back, and then you can able to access. It depends on the permission on top, can then be allowed on a specific task you can perform on your data. Role-based access control, as I said, it's like a granular level control, enable you to control the action you can perform on your Elasticsearch cluster. What I mean by that is that you can give which users can access which indexes. Now, if you I take that you have the knowledge about Elasticsearch before, because this is purely about the Open Distro we're talking about. But just to elaborate that when we put data into Elasticsearch, it is indexed. We index that data, and so it's like a table or it's like a database, which then we can then control what users are allowed to do on what indices. Okay, so that kind of a rollback index control. And then on top, not only we can provide index level security, we can also provide a document level or a field level security, which I will go and explain in the demo, and it will make it a lot more clearer from the features perspective. Okay. Then we have a feature of multi-tenancy. So one of my so the multi-tenancy idea is basically is that example is that let's suppose you've got different team members and you have Kibana running on you have a Kibana which is providing different log messages, which different dashboards to different users. So what you could do is you can have specific dashboards shared for a specific team members or teams who cannot, for example, there is a HR dashboard which has some sensitive information, and you don't want that to be shown by seen by some other team members or teams. So we could do something called private tenants or private um, um, uh, dashboards areas where only certain users can access it. So in this particular example, you've got, for example, we've got a e-commerce user who's basically has a specific role who can access only an e-commerce dashboard. Whereas on a flight, there's another maybe an index or another team who's accessing that dashboards. They can do it from their perspective. A global tenant, a concept for global tenant is that uh, all the users have access to the global one. So we could have a dashboard where we want to access, that we want to give this dash like it's a like a standard dashboard which can be accessed by different teams. So we can do that from that concept. So this is basically a concept of multi-tenancy in Open Distro for Elasticsearch. It does provide what we call cross-cluster search. So the idea is that if you have multiple cluster, we can control what we can search on the from our between the different clusters as well. Okay, very powerful from that perspective as well. Other feature for Open Distro for Elasticsearch is audit logging. This is very important from a perspective of GDPR and other stuff, that you want to be able to see who is able to access your Elasticsearch cluster. Because I have recently written a security blog, which I'll share. Is basically you can have a big Elasticsearch cluster up and running, and if you don't have a proper audit logging or security, you can expose your data, which can be terabytes of data, very easily, and very sensitive data. And there has been, if you search Elasticsearch incidents, you will see just people installed Elasticsearch as an open source, didn't enable any Elasticsearch security plugins or security, because obviously maybe some company maybe didn't want to spend the license, and some just forget it. And what happens is then you exposes your Elasticsearch cluster, and that's where this Open Distro is very powerful, where it comes and provide those out of box, like you can see if someone is logging into your cluster and running some sort of a queries and trying to copy your data and things like that. And that can be very powerful from an audit logging perspective. Other feature is alerting. So what alerting does is basically you can create and monitor alerts on the data itself. Okay, as I explained earlier, let's suppose you've got data from you putting a log messages, and you want to see if a certain switch interfaces goes down, or if, for example, if you see a certain amount of denies. Let's suppose you're putting a firewall logs into your Elasticsearch cluster and you're monitoring those logs. And you want to be able to see if there is any certain level of denies I see. I want to get an alert on that data. And that's where you can do it. You can create monitors and alert it. And then the advantage is you can integrate that with tools like Slack. And then you have a webhook access as well. So you can provide a webhook link and push those alerts out of box into your that alerting system as well. So that's really an advantage of that. So that's what I'm mentioned. Open Distro for Elasticsearch provide multiple alerting options and built-in integration with Slack and webhook. That's very powerful. Other feature is, as you can see, is about SQL. So if you come from background uh, of query of SQL. Uh, if you see here on this side, the right side, which is just moving, is basically a query DSL. This is basically a standard query language of Elasticsearch we use. Some people find it difficult, and that's where you can use Elastic SQL, which is basically a SQL-like, but still on the data itself, on your Elasticsearch data. And then, as you can see on the right side, when you run an SQL query, it gives you a result similar to a table, which again is just a JSON format within the Elasticsearch. And other feature I find it is basically uh, um, the translation. So you can write a query into a SQL query, but have that translate and gives you automatically how the query DSL look like. So that's really advantage of that. Um, So that's basically is there. Are parent-child joins supported in SQL? Very important thing to understand here is this is not a pure SQL we are talking about. It's not a MySQL. We are talking about running SQL query on a JSON data which is stored into Elasticsearch. Joins are their very limited functionalities, their parent thing in Elasticsearch, but we don't do it. We don't treat Elasticsearch as a standard database. There is another webinar I'm doing on 6 days from now, 6th of August, where we are talking about more in detail about differences between databases and Elasticsearch itself. This webinar was purely based on Open Distro for Elasticsearch, and that's why I didn't go more detail. But yeah, so this is a plugin which makes it easy to run queries on the Elasticsearch data. Performance analyzer is basically is another powerful tool. So if you, for example, on the production environment, it is very important to monitor your health of your Elasticsearch cluster. This is exactly what performance analyzer plugins provide. It's a visibility into your system on your Elasticsearch cluster, like a bottleneck, disk, operating system states, or even if the Elasticsearch is totally down, it will provide it. Okay, so performance analyzer provide a powerful RESTful API to query Elasticsearch metric, including consumption of network, disk, operating system, and visibility into metric that gives you ability to identify system bottleneck. The other advantage is that it runs. That's correct. Yeah, it can provide also the information about garbage collection. That's true. Can provide. The other advantage for performance analyzer is that it runs independently of your Elasticsearch cluster. So ensuring that you can still perform diagnostic and resolve your issue even if your cluster was under, you know, it was down. What it provides is it's provide over 60 metrics across different dimensions, and it's a very powerful, useful tool to analyze your Elasticsearch, monitor your Elasticsearch cluster. Okay. It does also provide what we call CLI, and it provides on the CLI level, it gives you those dashboards, out of box dashboards, ready-made dashboards, and you can even customize those dashboards or templates to show different metrics different way. But it's very powerful, and the other advantage is that you can push this data to all those metrics into another Elasticsearch cluster to do systems like you know, like if you have another RESTful API, and there is a question already about CloudWatch and Alarm. As soon as you have a REST API, any software or product who support RESTful API, you can push those logs back in, or that information into that cluster. So that's the advantage of this performance analyzer. It's a very powerful from a monitoring of that cluster itself. Can you insert CSV or text files into Elasticsearch? Yes, you can. There are different ways you can do it. You can use either Logstash or FileBeat, which you can insert those logs, unlike the CSV or text files as well. I'll give you a bit of, there is some slide which shows you a different, the architecture from that perspective, so that will give you an answer for that. Okay. Index management is another powerful feature. Like, for example, you wanted to see if a particular cluster is, you know, if you want to roll over your indices, if you are using Elasticsearch cluster, you can see that, you know, you want to be able to move Elasticsearch indexes if they are old enough or they're certain size. You want to either delete them automatically or make some decision based on that. You want to move them from a hot to warm node cluster, and that's where the advantage comes in from index management. You can do all those you know, states. For example, as you can see here, we're saying, okay, delete a cluster when it's 30 days old. Sorry, not the cluster, the index itself, and things like that. You can control a lot of things from index management as well. And other features which have come in now, in fact, they are already been recently been added. For example, you can do a root cause. Root cause analysis is another features or plugin which has been added, which basically provide work the information from a performance analyzer to alert administrator about the root cause of the performance of your Elasticsearch cluster, and things like availability issues and things like that. So you can alert those and root cause of those analysis very easily if there was any issue on your Elasticsearch itself. Uh, Other thing is anomaly detection. This is another one. So an anomaly is an unusual change in a behavior. Okay, anomalies in your time series data can lead you valuable information, right? For example, IT infrastructure data, an anomaly in the memory usage, or maybe a metric might have helped you uncover some kind of a system failure, or you could find some like some sort of a security behavior where you would not be able to do it. So standard way of monitoring or alerting is that you create static queries and then be able to create the alerts. But sometimes we miss those very important things, and that's where the machine learning or anomaly detection comes in, which can use a feature, powerful feature of machine learning to be able to make decisions and give you alerts based on that. So that's something that's been added recently as well as part of it. And then the powerful feature of, there is another very powerful feature which has been added on Open Distro for Elasticsearch is called KNN search. What KNN search feature is that it is a new feature which has been added. It short for, it is also called a nearest neighbor algorithm. Okay, it's based on the nearest algorithm. The the idea for this algorithm is it looks something, uh, gives you results when you search on the data, gives you results similar to your results which you have done previously, similar to what you have done. So I will give you example. Let's suppose you go to some website and you search for a certain song, right, from a certain artist or certain category. And the advantage with KNN search is that it automatically gives you, you normally, when you go to those search engine and it gives you, you may like this as well. This is basically is a related search or related documents or related values or information which can be come back as part of the search. So it's very powerful feature which you can use as a KNN search, or also for help image recognition, and also for fraud detection as well. Yeah, certainly it can done on recommendation, and exactly, yeah, so you can do it like based on the recommendation. So I would highly recommend you read about that. It's out of box available on Open Distro. It is not available on any other distribution of Elasticsearch. Very powerful features which has been added. So here now the question comes in. So we've got Open Distro for Elasticsearch and Elasticsearch, which is managed by elastic.co. Okay. So here are some of the features. Let's go through them purely very quickly, and give you a difference as well. So license wise, Elasticsearch, ELK, open source or basic. So the open source itself is a pure open source, which does not comes with features like which I just talked about: alerting, authentication, access control, LDAP integration, machine learning, SQL, JDBC. So all those features, if you were to just download a pure open source version of Elasticsearch, you will not get any of those features we talked about. Okay. Now comes the Elastic.co manage Elasticsearch distribution that gives you. It comes as a free features. Obviously, there is a free basic one. It is free to download it. It does not provide any alerting. It does not provide any authentication, access control. It does provide encryption. Recently, it's been enabled. It does not provide LDAP integration as well. Machine learning, I don't think this is basically, it's not on the basic one, it's not available as well. And even SQL, I guess SQL is available as part of the basic one. But let's suppose if you wanted to get those features in this distribution, you may have to get a subscription, a separate license for that. However, on Open Distro for Elasticsearch, which we are talking about it, all those features which we talk are all free of cost. Just download it and start using it. Okay, and lot or more features are keep added every time. So it's a very active community from that perspective as well. So now just quickly talk about what is ELK stack. And there is a question always, if you're using Open Distro, if you haven't used Open Distro, lots of people have questions, can we use ELK stack as part of our Open Distro? So the answer is yes. It is an Elasticsearch. You can do the same thing as you were doing it if you were using a standard Elasticsearch cluster. Okay. So what is Elasticsearch or ELK stack stands for? ELK stack is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Okay, Elasticsearch we talked about. Logstash is a tool which can be enrich logs. It can also read data from different sources. So there was a question, can you insert CSV or text file into Elasticsearch? Yes, you can use either Logstash, or there is another tools called FluentBit, which I will be talking about in upcoming slide. You can use that as well, or you can use FileBit. That's another open source tool which can be used to read the text files and push that into Elasticsearch. And Kibana is a visualization tool which can visualize your logs. So once the data is in Elasticsearch, you can enrich or visualize this very uh, beautiful graphs out of that. So here is the architecture like a ELK stack look like, and this is basically is where you have inputs like log file, messages, metrics, or any data that goes into Logstash. Okay, and Logstash sends an input, and then it filters it according to the it can be displayed or visualized on a browser using Kibana. Now, one thing to is very important here is that Logstash, in this diagram, we have InstaCluster. We just put as an InstaCluster because at InstaCluster, we provide manage Elasticsearch cluster as well, which is on Open Distro. So all those features we talked about are available. And you can spin a cluster very quickly on managed platform. And that basically then, for example, if you have an existing infrastructure which you are using Logstash or Beats or anything, you can use it the same way as you would use that into that thing. Okay. Okay, 1 second. So now discover Kibana, for example, a overview is that you have a Kibana, as you can see, is a tool. It's an open source tool which can be used to literally create those beautiful graphs on your data which is inside Elasticsearch. So for example, this one you can see how's your disk usage looks like, what is the average, and things like that. So these are all created by the thing. And what is new thing else also, this is something I just wanted to do it, is that now a new abbreviation started to come is called EFK, Elasticsearch, FluentBit, and Kibana. Okay, or FluentD. What is that? Is basically is Elasticsearch is the same we were talking about, but instead of Logstash, lots of company now use something called FluentD or FluentBit. And I had recently given a talk on, if you search on InstaCluster website where you register, is a talk on Open Distro EFK, basically where you can search, you can integrate FluentBit, and we were monitoring Kubernetes logs pushing into Elasticsearch using FluentBit. I will try to share that link as well. and then Kibana. So this is how it looks like from a architectural perspective. So you could have a Kubernetes cluster running, or it could be not, doesn't have to be a Kubernetes, it can be a normal cluster. And then you can read your logs, push that into a Fluentd, which can then push that into into Insta cluster, or your Open Distro Elasticsearch cluster. Once it's there, then you can do a log. You can visualize those logs. Okay. So that's basically is it. And Open Distro for Elasticsearch can be installed on different tools. Okay, a different you can deploy on Docker, you can deploy on a physical server, on a laptop, on a Raspberry Pi, on a VM, or also on Insta Cluster Managed platform. So Insta Cluster Managed platform, you can go and spin the cluster with few clicks and start using it. And if you're an enterprise, you can even have a support as well who will manage your cluster. And we have a enterprise level support where we have a team around the globe who monitors your cluster and alert if there is any issue. They contact you and help you in sorting those issues very quickly. So that's basically the advantage of using a managed platform provider like us. Today, I'm just going to quickly deploy that on Open Distro for on a Docker, and quickly show you what is the powerful feature of security, which is out of box, free of cost. And that's basically it. So if you have any questions before we quickly do a demo, I have only, sorry, Bill, how much time I have it? Just so that we can.
Let me see. We have 10:30. You have plenty of times. We can have questions and yeah, the demos.
Okay, so I can do the demo.
Yeah, perfect. 20 minutes or 25 minutes.
That's perfect. So before we go, I've got a few questions. Let me answer those one by one, and then we can go for a quick demo then. So can you insert CSV or text files into Elasticsearch? So the answer to your question, I've answered that using Logstash, FluentBit, or FileBit is another one you can search, which can push your logs as I have just shown in this diagram. So you will literally just read one of the log file or text file, which you push that into Logstash, and then you can do it. Or other architecture could be that the FluentBit can directly go and push that into Elasticsearch without, I mean, obviously that's one we talked about. Okay, so what is the advantage of FluentD over rsyslog server? The advantage for rsyslog and FluentD would be that you have lots of other plugins as well. Okay, and I haven't gone too much. I haven't worked personally on rsyslog, but depends on how many outputs you have it, because FluentD can also, not only push the same logs to Elasticsearch, but also some other outputs as well. You could push that into Kafka. You can push to something else as well. And that's where you can do it. And also FluentBit as well is another powerful one, because FluentBit is very low in memory. And FluentBit is now, because of the rise of Kubernetes, it is becoming quite famous now to use that Kubernetes thing on Kubernetes. I have a quick talk. Let me share quickly the link which I gave last week, a talk. It was a very good talk based on using FluentD and FluentBit basically to monitor infrastructure logs like Kubernetes logs, and that's something you can basically do that. So let me share that quickly, that talk. I think it's on the YouTube already as well, so you can there. I have just shared that here. Okay, I've got lots of questions to answer. Okay, which is better, FluentD or Logstash? You know what? It depends on your use case. I wouldn't say which one is better, and I won't be the person to judge, but I would say both have drawbacks and advantages. It could be that the FluentD might solve your issues because you have you need to put to certain outputs which Logstash is not doing it. Logstash has been for here for long, and it is very powerful. It do enrich your logs a lot. Um, Other question is slide deck going to be available? No, I don't think the slide deck will be available, but the presentation will be on YouTube. So if you want to listen again, please do. Elasticsearch is fast searching framework, or the their faster frameworks. It depends now what you're talking in what framework files. I mean, obviously there is a Solar as well. There are Elasticsearch is very fast. It's very commonly used now for many different use cases. And again, depends on what feature you're using. From a search perspective, I think the best one is Elasticsearch at the moment. It provides lot of features out of box for searching as well. Um, so in my opinion, yes, it is very powerful at the moment. Okay, so there is another one. We are using a licensed version of Elastic using LDAP integration. Are there any difficulties if you would like to migrate to Open Distro? So to Open Distro migration, I think will be. I don't see it should be a problem, but yeah, it's something maybe you need to discuss with the teams, like if you contact our consultancy team, they can help you migrating as well. But the advantage is you save a lot of money as well from that perspective. um, okay, so that is it for now from the questions. Let's now start doing. Oh yeah, so the question is, can you so Elasticsearch is clustered wise, right? This is basically uh, is Elasticsearch is a clustered product, so it works on cluster. So data, losing the data, there's a lot less chance of losing your data if you have built your cluster properly. So it should not be a problem from uh, thing from losing your data. But again, if you lose it, obviously this is all distributed. Data is distributed. So if you lose one node, you don't lose your data. How many replicas will be there in Elastic by default? By default is now one. It used to be 5, but now it comes on 1. Uh, that's the answer to your question. Okay, let me share my other screens. Okay, I'm gonna share. Okay, so if you can see my screen now here, just so that I will. Can you just confirm if you see my screen for the terminal? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So just to let you know, I downloaded an Open Distro. I'm just sharing the screen here, where you can go to Open Distro for website, for Elasticsearch website. Okay, you can download it and use this here. Download in different form like RPM or Docker, or Debian, and different ways you can deploy it. I'm using Docker deployment. Okay, most particularly in Docker, obviously this is a Docker uh, where the Docker is, but you can go to documents and then do an install, and then you click on Docker, and then you can deploy that. From my perspective, this is basically by default. If you use this thing, just want to make sure that you have enough memory, around 8 GB, and also in this particular example, they're running 2 nodes. What I have done is I've just running as a single node cluster. So this is my, so for you to run a Docker, you want to make sure your Docker is installed. You have to have a Docker running. And if I see Docker dash compose, I am just deploying a single node cluster so that we can just search for just for tested purposes. Okay, so it's a single node Elasticsearch cluster with Kibana running and going to connect it. Okay, obviously in production it is not recommended to run as a single node. You always run minimum of 3 nodes, and physically you deploy on different physical nodes as well. You don't run that on the same node, but for a development or deployment development perspective, you can do the same thing. So we are running one node, and all I did was docker compose up, and you can see that docker, if I do docker ps, I've got those two docker cluster containers up and running. So now let's talk about Kibana. So if I look localhost, you would see that 560 is where we can access Kibana. Okay, and this is where the Kibana look like. Now, by default, I was logged in already, but if you are using open source, you will not get this kind of access control. So by default, it provides you a security out of box, as I mentioned. So you are presented with username and password. You log in. Okay. Now, this is a Kibana visualization tool. If you're not aware about Kibana, I do have an upcoming in September. I'm gonna do a very detailed demo about how to build your own dashboards as well on Kibana. So please do join that if you like to learn more about Kibana. But for now, you can create those dashboard like, you know, so the dashboard look like similar to that. So for example, this is a sample data which you can push that into Elasticsearch, and you can create those logs, very beautiful logs and things like that. You know, this dashboards, and you can even go and hover over on your dashboards, and then you can look at it. Okay, but this is not for the talk today. And this is a sample data which you can push it when you log into Kibana. You can load this sample data by clicking on, you know, come to your main page, and then click on load, and then you can add that logged data. Okay, if you're used to using elastic.co version, it is a bit different now. The latest 1.90, the Kibana has changed a bit. So you will see you have anomaly detection, SQL alerting, and all those features already. Okay, so now let's talk about how you can configure security, because I'm going to talk about security. And because of the time, I had configured already a few things, but I will take you through so that once I log in, you understand what's the concept behind that. So there is a section called Discover. So if you go to Kibana on a Discover section, you can then tell what are an indexes. What is an index? Is a collection of different data documents going into Elasticsearch. Okay. So for example, this is a sample data of our e-commerce website, which will have information like customer first name, last name, gender, ID, last name, username, for example, order, what order information. These are all things. And you see, looking at this data, if you look at it, you can see that this is basically based on that, you can then create those graphs, right? So for example, if we look that dashboard, from the same data, we are managed to do something called a revenue dashboard, an e-commerce dashboard out of that box, right? Very powerful and useful. But let's suppose you have 2 users in your environment and you don't want to give an access to all of your field of that data, because currently I've logged in as admin and I can access all those different indexes. So you could have an admin index, you could have a HR index, and things like that. And you don't want that access, everyone accessing everything, because it could be a sensitive information, right? And your team members, you want to make sure they are controlled of what they can access. And this is what we're going to do it. I'm going to work on this particular index, and I'm going to tell that when a user from an e-commerce site logs in, a specific e-commerce team, they should only able to get certain type of fields, not all everything about order and everything. So let's go and configure that. So we go to security. Okay, and that's where the security feature comes in. So the first section, what you do is called user. So now you could have internal user or you could have external this authentication could come from external sources like LDAP and other stuff, right? You click on that. In this particular example, I have created something called e-commerce user. And literally, I've just said, what is that e-commerce user? We can create different users here. All you have to do is plus that and you create those. And these are local user accounts, okay? But you can also get users from a backend from your authentication from the external provider. But in this particular example, we got e-commerce user. Now, next step is you create roles. What roles does is it tells you what your user can do, users can do it. So I have created something called e-commerce restricted role. All you do is plus that and you create the name of the role and other stuff. So we go through this role one by one. So the name of the role is e-commerce restricted role. Okay. Then we go to the index permission and I tell what these role users can access which index. So I say, okay, this particular index, and they have access to all the indices only on this. They can do what permission they are allowed. So there are different things. You can delete index, you can add index, you can remove index, you can manage and things like that. So what I'm saying is on this particular index, this user can do whatever he wants to do, users which logs in. And then which is very powerful feature is that I am saying that this particular group users, when they log in, they only able to access these fields: user field, first name, full name, and email. Okay. And also I want, because the user information has a sensitive information, when they log in, they should not be able to see a detail. It should anonymize this. Okay, so there could be something where you want in your organization, and that's where you do it. So you create this. Okay, we created it, and the next step is now from a security perspective is what we call a role mapping. So role mapping is literally what you're saying is whatever users are there, they should be accessible from the they are part of this specific group basically. So you role map it. Now, so what we do is basically we now log in as admin. We've already logged in, right? So as an admin, when I log in, just look at this index. So I have a list of all these indexes and I have a full access to everything. But in our role, we said that anyone logs in with the e-commerce restricted role, they will only have access to 3 or 4 fields only. Okay. So now I'll log in, log off again. So I say ecom underscore user and the password. I know what is that. It's a very, and now if I come, I've logged in as an e-commerce user, and if I go and discover now, boom. So you got now only access to one index. Okay. And as you can see, we also restricted user to only certain fields which we selected. Okay. And look at this username. It has been anonymized. So you could have like where you still wanted user to show some fields, but anonymize it and also restrict what documents they can do it. So we have, with this example, shown you how you can create a restrict user on indexes, document, and field level security. So if you are using Elasticsearch already and you're using the security features, certainly you can do it out of box for no cost. Okay, so that was it for now. Hopefully I had more time, I would have taken it more detail, but that's it for now. So there is another question I have it. Are these RBAC policy imposed on direct REST call or only Kibana? You can configure REST calls as well to push that and configure that as well. Do you have any questions, other questions?
I see there are some questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure if you already go.
Oh, okay. I think I've answered all of them.
Okay.
Is Okay, so I've got another one. Is this what is used for AWS service called AWS Elasticsearch services, or do you select an AMI and run an Open Distro for Elasticsearch? As far as I know, I think Amazon services now start using Open Distro for Elasticsearch. As far as I know, I think they use this same version now. So when you go and get Amazon services for Elasticsearch, you basically use the um, same version of Open Distro. But obviously, you're not restricted to only use on Amazon. You can use anywhere. Like I've just downloaded on Docker. You can just go and download, deploy it, make a change to the cluster, and so you can do it. Just wanted to show basically is that if you come to virtual events here on the InstaCluster website, there are some good, as Bill mentioned, are upcoming virtual events, but there is one for Kibana as well. So if you want to learn more about Kibana, so that's an event for the Kibana, which is on 27th of September. So I'll be talking about very much in detail how to create your dashboards, and also I'm giving next week a talk on use cases of Elasticsearch. So maybe talking about more about the differences between databases and Elasticsearch and things like that. So yeah. Any other questions?